University of Oslo will be giving our first talk this morning.
Super, thank you. Yeah, I'll try with the baby. I'm a professor at the University of Oslo in energy systems modeling, and I'm going to present some of our work which focuses on how to include social science and behavior in energy system modeling. And I think I don't know how much you know about energy systems modeling, but it's basically operations research. So we're looking at how do we transition to a future net zero energy system that meets our decarbonization targets, mostly for 2050. And then the model, usually they optimize, so they minimize total energy systems costs, which are a combination of investment costs and operational costs. So we are minimizing, or we're finding a system that minimizes total energy system costs. And we're representing, so those are very, very big mathematical models that are representing supply and demand and the various technologies that supply energy or electricity, then the infrastructure that gets the electricity from the supply to the demand. The model designs the system for 2050 that would be least costs. And then usually most of us are actually more working on the policy side. So we're looking at kind of using these models as labs to look at, for example, what happens to the energy system if offshore wind halves in cost, if there's no acceptance for onshore wind. So that's a question that a lot of people work on. How does the system look like where there's very little onshore wind, because we have seen so much resistance towards onshore wind? Or, for example, in Norway, a lot of political parties in the last election actually wanted to stop trading electricity with neighboring countries because electricity prices have gone very high because of the interconnection to other countries. But we've shown actually welfare-wise, Norway would actually lose out. So that's something also we can use those models to advise policymakers and the public. So at University of Oslo, I'm leading a group of around 12 people where we are looking at various uncertainties. So techno-economic, weather and climate. So we have a few people who are actually looking at how does weather and climate change in 2050 and how does that impact the energy system. And then socio-political ones that I'm gonna focus in this talk now. We're looking at how do different socio-political uncertainties impact future energy system. How can we design systems that are resilient to those socio-political uncertainties? And then we also use energy system models to communicate trade-offs. So we don't just use them to answer research questions, but also to allow the public and policymakers to make more informed decisions. Yeah, so I said already, energy system models are used to design future energy systems that meet carbon targets. And often if you forget about social acceptance or social justice or other social factors, we risk meeting those carbon targets. So that's one big motivation for including more social factors in the models, to come up with systems that are more grounded in the real world and thus are more likely to actually be implemented. And then we also use them to allow stakeholders to understand system complexities and making more informed decisions. And we have a number of projects in Norway, Europe, and also this is one in South America and Chile, where we work together with social scientists and use our energy system model to communicate possible futures for these communities and make more informed decisions. There's a few of our publications related to this, and I'm going to focus now on two projects. One is an EU project that is just finished, and we are kind of finalizing the work there, and the other one is a national project where we are working with, where we have a social science lead who is trying to work on how to get qualitative data into models. Yeah, So energy infrastructure has impacts on the environment. It is cited. So that's why there's a lot of, it's very visible. So you have social impacts and environmental impacts. So social impacts are, for example, visibility, noise. This was a project where we worked on the west coast of Norway, where they're trying to expand this wind farm that you can see there's quite a big aluminium production there, and they were trying to increase the production, but there was a lot of social opposition towards that because, often social opposition, but also environmental ones. Those are mainly related to bird strikes and also impacts on the local habitats. And we use, as a framework, we have a model that we developed together with UCL called HIRAS. And there we model the future ecosystem in 2050 at full hourly resolution. So we minimize the operational costs for 2050 for each hour. And the model makes capacity investment and dispatch decision. So it decides when to dispatch what plants in each hour, across the year at least cost. We model supply and demand under the same weather conditions. So we have data from reanalysis, so modeled weather data for the past 60 years. And then we can actually either use quite a bad weather year or use multiple weather years to design a system that can also withstand the weather variability. So here you can see in blue, you can see that this is the weather moving across, or the wind speeds moving across Europe over one day. And then the model decides where to invest in what technologies. You can see here we model the whole of Europe. The model invests then in what regions to supply, for example, wind turbines, solar PV to meet demand. In this one project called WIMBY, Wind in My Backyard, we were working together with social scientists. It was an EU project, and environmental scientists to look at what happens if there's, or how to design a system that meets future electricity demand, meets our carbon reduction targets, but also takes care of the social environmental impacts of onshore wind. So it was called Wind in My Backyard. This work, the publication is currently under review. We just addressed the reviewers' comments. And there we're looking at, onshore wind is really important in meeting the decarbonization targets. It's really cheap. The technology is available. But we have seen many countries where onshore wind deployment has completely stopped. For example, Norway. We haven't had any new wind energy deployment over the last 5 years. Similar had been seen in the UK as well. So how do we design a system that actually takes care of the social environmental impacts of onshore wind? So together with our social scientist colleagues and ecological colleagues, we developed 3 levels of tolerance across social environmental impact dimensions. So we have this land modeling framework where we use spatial data on ecological impacts, but also social impacts that onshore wind could have, and then develop different scenarios where you can place wind energy. So for social, for example, we vary the proximity to settlements, and we vary the exposure to noise, to shadow flicker. We also had some colleagues that were developing a model that could tell us which areas would be seen as have the highest scenicness across Europe. So we can also have different levels of scenicness exclusions. And then also proximity to the coastline, because that's also often where there's more opposition. For environmental scenarios, we have protected areas. And then we had our colleagues from YASA who developed a map of high vulnerability to bird collision. We have also a map of threatened bats. And then also we have different scenarios, whether we include or exclude peatlands and forests. And then we develop these maps, so then the model would see under each impact scenario where one could place wind energy or not. And that would be an input into the model. So that would determine then how much the model can invest in wind energy across Europe. And that you can see here, it reduces the European-wide onshore wind capacity from 5,000 gigawatt to around 200 gigawatts when moving from the highest to the lowest tolerance case. And that's an input into the model. Yeah, and now I'm just going to show you some results. So you can see here on the left what the model invests in across Europe. So this is for the whole of Europe. In the case where people show high acceptance across the environmental and social dimension. So this is the high scenario on the left. So there the people are very positive towards onshore wind. So there's high local acceptance on both dimensions, so the social and environmental. And then we show when we move towards the low dimension, so where we have, which we saw before, with only 200 gigawatts, so the model needs to move away from onshore wind, and it moves towards, you can see here, offshore wind. So it installs a lot less onshore wind, moves towards offshore wind. And also what's quite interesting, the flexibility option, so storage becomes very important. So storage allows us to preserve more landscapes for wind energy development. And also we see a little bit of nuclear as well in the scenario where there's very low acceptance towards onshore wind. Yeah, this is how it changes across Europe. So you can see here how much wind gets installed. So from 1,500 gigawatt in the scenario with the highest acceptance towards only 238 gigawatts in the lowest scenario. And this also leads to higher cost. So we can see here the black is the cost line for Europe. So you can see we see up to 14% higher system costs when we have low acceptance for onshore wind. But it's quite different depending on the countries. So some countries see a lot higher cost increases than others do. So that's not equally distributed across the countries. Yeah. So this was the European project, and there we very much used expert opinion. We didn't work with lay people, but we used expert opinion on social factors as well as environmental factors, and implemented them in an energy system model, mainly via developing this land impact maps and how much land area is available for wind energy. And then we have another project where we work a lot closer with stakeholders. So this is led by one of our social science researchers, Paula Velasco. So she has a project where we work on Norway as a case study. As I said already, Norway has a very good wind resources, but very low acceptance towards wind. And we're actually seeing now we have issues with some regions not being able to decarbonize the industry because there's not enough supply available, and other regions not being able to develop the industry they have planned to. And that's also becoming an issue for Norway, because Norway is the aim is to move away from oil and gas income towards other industries. And one advantage would be cheap electricity. So we have, for example, aluminium production that wants to expand but cannot because there's not enough supply available at the moment. So it's quite important for also for a lot of the municipalities to develop more power production, and wind is kind of the obvious choice because it's cheap and very good wind resources. So there Paula came up, so she uses the capability approach, which allows us to understand well-being. So we were trying to understand how does a good life look like for people across Norway, and then link that to wind energy. So first of all, to try to understand what's important to people and how could that be affected by wind energy, both positively and also negatively. And we have two case studies, one in the very far north at the border to Russia. That's a shipping town. Most of the income is from fishing. And yeah, there's a lot of, it's a very industrialized town. Whereas the other one is in the southeast. It's a quite agricultural town, still within commuting distance to Oslo, but towards the border to Sweden, and it's quite a poor community for Norway. So we have those two different communities, and also what's quite important in the north, we have Sami communities, so indigenous people that they do reindeer herding there. So that's also quite important because that affects where one can have wind energy. And then we were doing 58 semi-structured interviews with residents, reindeer herders, and other land users, NGOs, industry, and government in those two places. And those are the shared well-being dimensions that we found were most important. So the first one is being able to live in and care for nature. The second one is having financial security and meaningful work. And the third one was being able to live close to family and friends. So those were identified across the two case studies. Yeah, so you can see here, again, the north and the south where we were running those interviews. So being able to live and care for nature, that's very important in Norway. There's this concept of friluftsliv. So you really spend a lot of time outside, and it's a value in itself. So most people have also a cabin, which is a very simple hut, where they would spend their weekends. And for them, it's very important to spend their time outside in untouched nature, as they would call it. And how does this relate to wind power? So it's often seen as a threat to recreational areas. So yeah, you take away the unspoiledness of nature that people like to experience when they go hiking. They're very worried about losing tranquility and sense of remoteness. So if they see a wind turbine, they don't have this feeling of being out in the wilderness anymore. And then also some concerns of impacts to biodiversity. But then this is the question, what kind of nature is worth your protection? So in another project, for example, we work together with in what forests to place wind energy, because there's this perception that forests are very natural, but even in Norway, most of them actually industrialized forests, which most people are not aware, with often quite low biodiversity. So yeah, what kind of nature is worth your protection, and how does it actually, wind energy actually impact nature? Yeah, then financial security and meaningful work. So that was especially important in the north, where people were really about what kind of work can we have? A lot of the fishing licenses have been recently sold to rich people from Oslo. So it's become quite expensive for locals to do fishing. So there we're really looking what can be new forms of job. Also, they felt quite remote and far from Oslo, so they thought they cannot really depend on waiting for the government to develop new industries in the north. They have to develop industries for themselves. So they were a bit more open towards wind energy in case it brings new jobs. Yeah, so for example, if it creates jobs, I would be willing to have them in my backyard. They already have a wind farm there, which they felt was actually not very much impacting their well-being, and it brought some jobs, not that many, but yeah, some. However, for reindeers, this was quite different because it actually impacts their livelihood negatively, because according to them, the reindeers would avoid the wind farms, so that would actually impact how they make their living. Yeah. As expected, but especially in the north, not so much in the south, where wind power is perceived as strengthening financial security and meaningful employment, people are a lot more positive towards its deployment. And then what was also really important were family, friends, and community. So that's something Norwegians quite often move back to their hometowns. They hope to find jobs there. But what we've also seen, a lot of the communities actually struggling. The jobs are mostly in Oslo, and schools are closing down. So wind farms, they now actually bring back, there's a new tax which goes to the municipality, so that can actually keep, for example, schools or nurseries open, which has been now seen as a more positive thing than it has been in the past, because the financial situation of the municipalities has become a lot worse over the last few years. Yeah, so there's a lot of attention towards family and friends, sharing everyday life, and really an emphasis that a good life is to experience love. Yeah. So what was really the focus here, that wind farms potentially could maintain services. So there's been a lot of newspaper articles across Norway that schools have shut down the last 2 years. Some communities are really struggling. A lot of the billionaires moving away because of high taxes. So I've seen, and they bring actually income to the local communities via tax. So they've been struggling, and then wind farms are seen now slowly as a potential and possibilities for municipalities to gain income, and then keep local services alive. Yeah, and then so we've identified those 3 well-being dimensions, and then we are developing from this qualitative data, we're developing quantitative scenarios. So we have 2 scenarios which are indirectly related to well-being dimension. So people talked a lot about, do we really need wind turbines? Can we not lower our energy consumption? So we developed some scenarios where we have a lot lower energy consumption, with lower use of cars, for example. Cars are mostly electric in Norway, but also heating houses, for example, less. The second one is technology preference. So people often talk about nuclear energy. So there's been a lot of lobbying towards small nuclear, so SMRs, and we're trying to also show what it would mean if we develop nuclear instead of onshore wind, because this has been really brought forward across the two municipalities that we worked with. And then we developed 4 scenarios which are directly related to well-being dimensions. So nature protection, so there we develop scenarios where we allow wind energy in a lot less of the areas. So currently, for example, a lot of the wind energy is actually in protected areas, because that's where it's on the coast, where often the areas are protected, but the wind is good. So we see actually quite a lot of wind in protected areas. So there we develop scenarios where we would be a lot more restrictive on where you can develop wind. The second one was contribution to local industry, so that we develop scenarios where we see more electricity demand due to an increase in local industry that would bring jobs or keep jobs in the area. And then we also have scenarios linked to economic activities such as reindeer herding, so where we would not allow wind energy in those areas that are most important for Sami reindeer herding. And then also for friluftsliv, so outdoor life, we would also develop scenarios where a lot of the areas are where most of the hiking, skiing is taking place would be excluded from wind energy development. And then we actually went back, so we had just had some more workshops in those two municipalities, but also with industry, where we would actually present those scenarios and receive their feedback. So we have this as an iterative process. So we now, for example, for the low energy consumption, we would actually go back and ask them, is this something you can actually imagine? You talk about low energy consumption. Is that something you imagine? We input those scenarios into our Norwegian energy system model, and then also show them how that would change their local energy infrastructure. Yeah, so currently we have been doing these feedback sessions. We have only been doing them actually in the northern community, because we were not allowed, or we were asked not to go back to the one in the southeast of Norway, because there's so much tension at the moment. There have been around four proposed wind farms, which a lot of local hearings and a lot of actually conflicts that were created because of those hearings. So the mayor there asked us not to go back and do this feedback session, because he didn't want to have any more, kind of local conflicts. So he wanted, So, and also we don't, as researchers, we don't want to actually go back and cause problems with our research. So we decided to skip the feedback sessions there. We only did them with industry in the northeast, but not with lay people. So we went back to Båtsfjord. Yeah, so we did 4 individual feedback sessions, and we're currently working on implementing changes to our scenarios based on those feedback sessions, and then input them into the energy system model. Do I have more time? Sorry, I'm running out of time. Yeah, so I'm just finishing here now with the EU project. We were also running local workshops. So we had here, this is the west coast of Norway, Haugesund. We were running these 3D visualization games where people could actually see how it would look like if they placed wind turbines in their local areas, how that could actually look like. And then based on that, they were developing, or they were identifying on a map areas of no-go and go areas for wind energy deployment. So you can see here, red is where they really don't want to see further onshore wind deployment, and green is where they would be okay. And there they had to meet the demand of the industry. So they had to place in this game, they had to place wind energy so as to meet the future demand of the industry, which would allow them to keep jobs. And that's quite important, because there's one big employer, and if they moved away from that area, most of the jobs would be lost. So you can see this is the city, the main city. So people don't want wind energy in the main city, also not where there's the bird sanctuaries. But here the green areas is where there's actually currently the industry. So one big topic was to have them wind energy where currently industry is located. And we've run these workshops across 4 case studies in Italy, Austria, Norway, and Portugal. So we run the same 3D visualization game across those 4 case studies. And we're currently looking at what would actually happen if we design our future energy system based on what people locally desire. So we're developing scenarios based on what we found on this workshop. So for example, one topic across those 4 case studies was that people want to see wind energy close to industry. So we would, again, use our spatial approach and then allow wind energy to be developed close to current industry. Another something that we found across case studies was that people like to see wind energy in open landscapes where there's a lot of agriculture, intensive agriculture already, again, quite industrialized landscapes. So again, we can develop scenarios based on that. And then we want to look at what if we actually follow what people in those workshops tell us where they could imagine wind energy or not. Can we still meet decarbonization targets across Europe, and how much more expensive are they? So this is one of our current projects that we're working with those four communities, and again translating workshop data into quantified input data for these large-scale mathematical models. Yeah, and I think I'm around at the end of my talk. Then I'll leave it here. Yeah, thank you.